Your jihad is over, said the Pakistani policeman with a satisfied grin on his face. He did not know who exactly it was that he had arrested, except that he was an Arab. The Arabs had caused Pakistan nothing but trouble lately. If it were up to him, they should all be arrested and deported back to where they came from. Damn it, thought Abu Zubaydah. How did he know I was an Arab, even though I am wearing the Afghan white turban? Normally, he would bribe his way out of the situation. There was an officer standing nearby watching the scene. A bribe was out of the question. I am with the United Nations, he said instead, showed his UN card. Policeman was disinterested. Probably he did not even know what a UN card was. You could tell them inside the post, he said. Abu Zubaydah knew there would be no easy way out. Zubaydah was arrested in March of 1995 as part of a general crackdown on Arabs in the Peshawar area. It was not the first time that the police carried out such campaigns. Since 1992, the international community has been pressuring Pakistan to do something about the militant Arabs residing on their territory. Algeria and Egypt were experiencing campaigns of revolutionary violence in this period, connected to veterans from the Afghan-Soviet War. In Algeria, the armed Islamic group and other Islamist guerrillas were involved in the Algerian Civil War. In Egypt, Al-Jamaah Islamiyah started a domestic terrorist campaign, which by 1993 had killed some 120 people. Both countries accused Pakistan of hiding additional terrorists on their territory. The United States joined the complaints, especially after the failed attack on the World Trade Center on February 26, 1993. The main suspect in the case, Ramzi Youssef, escaped after the attack and was believed to be hiding in Pakistan. The United States was also concerned about Pakistan's support for Islamist guerrillas in Kashmir and considered putting Pakistan on the notorious list of state sponsors of terrorism. The threat never materialized. Nevertheless, from early 1993, Pakistan was keen to demonstrate that it was not a terrorist state. The authorities initially declared that all Arabs who did not have a legal reason to stay in Pakistan must leave by January 31st of 1993. The deadline was not immediately enforced. However, in April and May of 1993, there was a wave of mass arrests of Arabs in Peshawar. It was in this context that Osama bin Laden and a number of associates relocated to Sudan. Others had fled to Afghanistan, where they were given shelter by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, and other Mujahideen leaders. Yet others were able to stay in Peshawar under cover of the many Arab NGOs that were still operating in the city. Al-Qaeda's Jihad Wall camp in Khost got at least one new resident in this period, the Egyptian Abu Hamifia, a former bomb maker from Al-Jamaah Islamiyah. He would stay in Jihad Wall all through the Civil War and the coming of the Taliban, hiding from Egyptian and Pakistani intelligence services. In the end, he became one of the 9 Arabs that were killed in the U.S. missile strike on Khost on August 20th, 1998. Pakistani authorities did not want to have a consistent policy toward the Arabs. This was due in part to internal disagreements and, in part, to the relatively weak position of the Benazir Bhutto government. The political opposition used the Bhutto government's treatment of the Arabs as a pretext to tarnish the image of the regime. Arabs were expelled to their home countries, would surely face long prison terms or even the death penalty. How could the Bhutto regime support such inhumane policies? Additionally, there was considerable pressure from Pakistani Islamist parties like Jamaat-e-Islami to leave the Arabs alone. The pestering of Arabs in Peshawar continued throughout 1994, albeit in a more subdued manner. In June of 1994, a group of Arabs known as the Caliphate Group, which had previously refused to assist Mustafa Hamid's Tajikistan project, were involved in a tribal feud in the regime Tirajal Valley of Khyber Agency. The Arabs wanted to establish an Islamic caliphate on Pakistani soil and was sponsored by a local tribal leader. However, the other tribes in the area mobilized against them, resulting in a number of Arabs being killed. In August, 4 Egyptians were arrested in Peshawar accused of belonging to the Caliphate group. In Pakistani newspapers, the stories took on a quite different flavor. It was alleged that the Arabs had set up the Caliphate as cover for a range of immoral activities, including womanizing. The case led to a heated debate in Pakistan, with government representatives arguing the Arabs should be extradited, while the Islamist opposition, fronted by Qazi Hussein Ahmad, arguing for their innocence. At the time of their arrest, Pakistan had just signed a formal extradition treaty with Egypt, and Interior Minister Nasrullah Balbar promised that the Egyptians would be extradited in accordance with the treaty. We do not know what happened to the Egyptians. What seems certain, however, is that Pakistan continued their oppressive policy toward the Afghan Arabs. In February of 1995, the wanted WTC poster and the bomber himself, Ramzi Yousef, was apprehended in Islamabad. He was promptly extradited to the United States despite protests from the Islamist opposition, which resented the idea of a Muslim being extradited to face trial in a non-Muslim country. After Ramzi's arrest, dozens of Arabs were arrested in Peshawar and elsewhere in a campaign to roll up Ramzi's network. In August, some 65 Egyptians were deported to Egypt in a chartered airplane sent by Egyptian authorities. Pakistan's mass deportation of Arabs provides context for understanding why Taliban's refusal to expel bin Laden in the late 1990s became an issue of such symbolic importance. After Ramzi Yousef's arrest, it transpired that he was not only wanted for his role in the WTC bombings, he had also been involved in anti-regime activities inside Pakistan, including a plot to assassinate Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. This is probably why Pakistan's reaction toward the Afghan Arabs after Ramzi's arrest was so severe. But the problems did not end there. In November of 1995, Egyptian militants carried out the first terrorist attack by Afghan Arabs on Pakistani soil. A truck bomb exploded outside the Egyptian embassy in Islamabad, killing 16 and injuring dozens. The attack was part of an ongoing terrorist campaign against the Egyptian government, but is also described as a revenge pact for Pakistan's deportation policies. By now, it was clear that the Afghan Arabs were not merely giving Pakistan a bad image abroad. They had become a threat to the Pakistani state itself. It was in this context that Abu Zubaydah was arrested at a checkpoint outside Peshawar in March of April of 1995. They realized him after 3 months. Perhaps they bought his cover story of being an asylum seeker registered with the UN. Or perhaps they were bribed by Abu Zubaydah's associates. We will never know for sure. What we do know is that he was released. Abu Zubaydah's story was palatable enough for the UN to believe him and to issue him official papers. The UN representative even visited him in jail and promised to plead his cause. "You look like a terrorist, but I know you well," he told Abu Zubaydah as he left. Only if you knew, thought Abu Zubaydah. He certainly had no love for the UN or the infidel nations, as he termed them. But in this case, they proved to be useful to his cause. By July 1995, Abu Zubaydah was back in business, a business that was becoming more difficult by the day. Abu Zubaydah was one of the few individuals that continued to facilitate training for Arabs in Afghanistan. By 1995, the Pakistani policies toward Arabs in Peshawar had forced these facilitation networks underground. Only a few training camps for Arabs were left in operation inside Afghanistan. Some of the camps were connected to Afghan Mujahideen leaders such as Gulbuddin Hekmatyar or Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, who fought in the Civil War. Other camps were run by Pakistani groups like Harakat al-Ansur, who fought in Kashmir. Al-Qaeda's old camps, Al-Faruq, was used to train Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Chechens. But very few camps offered basic training to Arabs who wanted to fight in Bosnia, Chechnya, or elsewhere. Al-Qaeda's Al-Faruq camp had previously offered such training, but the courses were terminated in late 1992 or early 1993. After that, there was essentially one operation left: Qa'ida. Qa'ida was one of the longest operating training camps for Arab recruits in Afghanistan. It was located in Khost, most likely in the eastern part of the province on the border with Karakum. The agency in Pakistan called FATA, the federally administrated tribal areas. It has often been described as an al-Qaeda camp, but there is little to substantiate this claim. Qa'ida was established by Abdullah Azzam's services office in the late 1980s or the early 1990s as a subsidiary to the famous Sada camp in Karakum agency. In the fall of 1994, the Qa'ida camp was on the verge of shutting down, indicating the services office was withdrawing its support. The services office was experiencing pressure from Pakistani authorities in this period. Pakistani police in August of 1994 raided the House of Martyrs, an Arab guest house in Peshawar, and arrested 7 Arab individuals who were released only after arduous efforts, according to Abu Zubaydah. In this period, Abu Zubaydah took over as emir for the House of Martyrs and established a close cooperative relationship with Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, the emir of Qa'ida. From now on, the work of the camp and the guest house became integrated into one. It has been alleged that Qa'ida was financed by bin Laden, but this is hard to substantiate. Abu Zubaydah had contact with lower-ranking al-Qaeda members at Jihad Wall in the mid-1990s, but it is unlikely they had the means or authority to finance other training camps. During the Afghan Civil War, it was individual entrepreneurs like Abu Zubaydah and Mustafa Hamid, and not al-Qaeda, who kept the Arab training camps open. When the Afghan Civil War started in 1992, al-Qaeda stopped participating on the front lines in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, like most of the Afghan Arab community in Peshawar, saw participation in the Civil War as fitna, which means internal strife, rather than legitimate jihad. Initially, al-Qaeda planned to continue using Afghanistan for training, but training in the Civil War setting turned out to be challenging for 2 reasons. First, Pakistan after 1992 changed their policy toward the Afghan Arabs, hampering their freedom of movement within Pakistan. Second, al-Qaeda's camps experienced pressure from Afghan Mujahideen groups who wanted al-Qaeda's weapons and ammunition for the Civil War. Due to these challenges, in 1994, the al-Qaeda leadership in Sudan considered closing the camps altogether. But the camps stayed open, largely due to the initiative of Abu Atta, the camp emir, and with the protection of the local tribal government in Khost. This proved to be an advantage in 1996, when bin Laden was forced to leave Sudan and once again relocate al-Qaeda's headquarters back to Afghanistan.